Hello, mindsetters. Welcome to Learn Extra Live. I'm Katleho and this is Tracy. How are you, Tracy?
Fine, Anita.
Great, thank you. So, as you know, we are doing physical science and we are doing the Chloralkali Industry. Sounds awesome. Tell us more.
Oh, it is awesome. I quite like it. It's how we take things like sodium chloride, table salt, and we make it into sodium hydroxide, very important base. We make it into chlorine gas, which is quite dangerous, and hydrogen gas. It's actually a really interesting section.
That's
it's
cool.
Quite important
That's
to us,
cool.
yeah.
So these grade 12s are going to actually have an awesome show today, huh?
I hope so, and it's a very important section. You're guaranteed to get it.
Awesome. So
Guaranteed.
that's how you focus. That's your hint to focus more.
Absolutely.
You can walk over to the board.
Thanks.
Guys, as you know, it's Tuesday, and it's an awesome Tuesday. So as usual, we have some prizes. There is our Casio calculator, as well as our Casio labeler. I know most of you have received your calculators and labelers, so you can tell your friends how to get it. I won't even tell you. You can tell them how you want it and why. You can actually just tell them on our page. And our page is facebook.com/learnextra, and our Twitter handle is @learnextra. So this is where you guys are just going to shoot in all your questions and comments and everything. As you know, this is a very important section, and it's guaranteed to be in your prelims and, of course, as well, maybe your finals. So make sure that you guys are tuned into the T. Thank you to Liberty as well for bringing us this awesome show. Over to you, Tracy.
Oh, thanks, Katleho. Well, guys, I think we were actually just discussing before we came on air, particularly if you're writing the common prelims, it's crunch time now, okay? Only 2 and a bit weeks. Physics on 31st of August, chemistry on the 3rd of September. So it's crunch time. If you're not writing common prelims, your dates might be a little bit different, but that's okay. Now, the chloralkali industry, it's part of chemical systems. There are actually a couple of very important parts of chemical systems, the chloralkali industry, the fertilizer industry, and then we have batteries, okay? Now, guys, you are going to get a question on each of those. It is a guaranteed. There are no if, buts, or maybes about this. They are very, 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 very important, okay? Now, the chloralkali industry is a worldwide industry. All 3 of those industries have been put into a curriculum because they're important to us as a nation. So they bring in a lot of foreign exchange, we import, we export around them, so they're very, very important. Now, what is the chloralkali industry? So this is a bit of a definition. It refers to the industry that uses the electrolysis of a saturated salt solution, sodium chloride, also known as brine, okay, to produce chlorine gas, hydrogen gas, and sodium hydroxide. Hydrogen is sometimes regarded as a bit of a byproduct, but pretty much they all produce hydrogen gas, so we're going to talk about all 3 together. The important thing about this is there are 3 different ways we can produce my products, but the basics for all 3 of these are the same. Each of the ways have advantages and disadvantages, which we're going to talk about. But first thing what we need to talk about is the fact that we can take sodium chloride and we can make chlorine, hydrogen, and sodium hydroxide. Now, I'm pretty sure someone's screaming at the TV right now going, Tracy, how in the world do we get hydrogen from sodium chloride? Well, it's done from a salt solution, guys, which means we are adding water somewhere in the solution. Okay, it's not done from molten sodium chloride. We could do it from molten sodium chloride, but it's extremely dangerous because if we did the electrolysis of molten sodium chloride, in other words, we melted the sodium chloride to make a liquid, we would be producing sodium metal at extremely high temperatures. I'm hoping some of you remember from grade 9, grade 10, wouldn't have done it in grade 11, hopefully, or you've seen it on YouTube, your teacher put sodium metal into water for you, and you saw that it's a very exothermic reaction, it's very dangerous. If you now have the sodium metal that's at very high temperatures, and you're talking a good couple of thousand degrees Celsius, if it reacts with the oxygen in the air or it comes into contact with water, there is a big explosion. Extremely dangerous. So we don't do that. We do it in a salt solution. In other words, it's aqueous. It reacts with the water. The water then allows us to get hydrogen and sodium hydroxide. But now, why are these three important? Guys, you do need to know this, okay? Why do we need sodium hydroxide? I'm just going to give you some uses. We use it for the extraction of aluminium. It's used in the food industry. It's for effluent treatment. What does that mean? It's what we use to treat the waste that comes from our toilets, okay? The production of soap, okay? Detergents, it's used in papers, to make paper and textiles. Very, very important, but very, very important, grade 12s. Extremely, extremely strong base. Very, very dangerous stuff, okay? Hydrogen, well, it's used in rocket fuel, used for the production of nylon, which we're grateful for clothes. It's used in the production of margarine, which you should remember from one of your addition reactions in margarine. Ammonia, it's used for the production of ammonia, hydrochloric acid, hydrogen peroxide. Ladies, we like hydrogen peroxide in our hair. Chlorine gas, production of PVC, polyvinyl chloride, plastics, which made for really bad clothing, but imitation leather essentially, paints, dyes, bleaching, insecticides, herbicides, dry cleaning agents, used to make hydrochloric acid, disinfects drinking water, and the use in swimming pools. Very, very, very important. Also, chlorine gas is the basis of a very toxic biological warfare weapon called mustard gas. First around in, I think, World War I. Okay, luckily we don't use it anymore. Very, very horrible death. Mustard gas got its name simply because chlorine is that yellowy color. It's a yellowy gas, okay? Not a pretty thing at all. We don't want to be messing with it. Now, let's move on to the chemical reactions, because it's an electrolysis reaction, which means we're talking about redox. So we're going to set up an electrolytic cell, which I'm hoping you remember from when you did electrochemical electrolytic cells. Remember, in an electrolysis reaction, we're taking electrical energy, and we're making a chemical reaction. We're converting it to chemical energy. In this case, we're going to use it to separate sodium chloride. So the half reactions and the overall reaction, there's three types of cells we can use: membrane, diaphragm, or mercury. All three of these have the same basic three reactions to them: your oxidation half reaction, your reduction half reaction, and then your overall reaction. At the anode, which is your oxidation half reaction, remember the sodium chloride has now mixed. It's dissolved in water, so you have sodium ions and chlorine ions. Your chlorine ion loses its electron, it is oxidized, and becomes chlorine gas. What's important here? At the cathode, we're not actually looking at what happens with the sodium. The Na plus ions don't get reduced. It's actually the water of the solution that becomes reduced, which gives us the OH minus ions. So essentially what's going to happen along the way is your sodium plus ions, which are from your NaCl in the beginning, are going to react with the OH minus ions, and they're going to give us sodium hydroxide because they will be attracted to each other. Your net cell reaction, which has no spectators in, which means doesn't have the sodium, is chlorine plus water, gives me the hydroxide, chlorine gas, hydrogen gas, which is why to say hydrogen is a byproduct, not 100% correct, but when we go down and we look at the overall reaction with spectators, we need to add in our sodium, gives me sodium hydroxide, okay? Whichever cell we're looking at, those three reactions stay the same. Grade 12s, you are going to get one of the cells, which we now need to look at in a little more detail. We're going to start with the most popular one. The other two cells, the diaphragm cell and the Mercury cell, shouldn't be used anymore. And in fact, in Europe, by 2012, this year, everyone who uses these cells has to now be using the membrane cell, directed from the EU, the European Union. They must be using the membrane cell. So that's the one we're going to look at. Very basic. Here's my membrane cell. And you're going, that's not very exciting. We know it's not very exciting. we're going to add a whole bunch of stuff to it, okay? Now, what happens with the membrane cell is over here, okay, so we're going to draw this in. Right here, I put in a saturated sodium chloride solution, okay? In that saturated sodium chloride, that then breaks up into Na plus ions and Cl minus ions. I'm making that my positive electrode, my other one's my negative electrode. Okay, this is the anode here. Anode. Here's my cathode. And hopefully you're going, well, except of course when I can write nicely for you, cathode. There we go. Okay, there's our cathode. Now, most of you should hopefully say, well, this makes sense because these Cl minus ions are going to be attracted to the anode. It's positive. Okay, the reaction's going to happen, and we're going to get chlorine gas leaving. Brilliant. We're happy with that. What happens here, though? These sodium ions are attracted to the cathode. Okay, it is the positive side of the cell. This is our membrane. This membrane is very, very special. It is a selective membrane. Only, and it's a very close guarded secret as to what this membrane is actually made out of. It only allows positive ions to pass through it in one direction. Okay? They only pass in one direction, which we're very happy about. What happens over here is we put in H2O. The H2O and the sodium we've got here, the H2O gets attracted to the cathode. We know what happens here. The H2O, the water gets reduced. Hydrogen gas comes out the top. The OH minus ions, which have been left behind, are attracted to the Na plus ions, thus forming sodium hydroxide, and the sodium hydroxide gets taken out the bottom, okay? And what happens here, this is nice, is whatever NaCl, that's what we call depleted NaCl over here, whatever doesn't get used, gets put through a process, we increase the concentration, and we put it back into the system, okay? So very, very simple at the anode. We did this earlier. We still have 2Cl minus, which becomes Cl2 plus 2 electrons. Here, our water, we add 2 electrons to it, becomes H2 plus 2OH minus. And together, when we don't consider our spectator ions, we say that we have 2Cl minus plus H2O becomes Cl2 plus H2 plus OH minus. Okay? So the membrane cell is actually very, very simple. Up till now, we didn't really look at electrolysis where we separated into two different halves, but we really need to here because we really just want the sodium plus ions to migrate. It's selective. Why would we want to use it when there's two other options? Well, first of all, there is absolutely no negative impact on the human environment. Of course, the only indirect negative impact would be the fact that we need to use quite a bit of electricity, so it's the burning of the coal and whatever else before it gets to this section that's important. This is a very environmentally friendly cell. Every single one of the products can be used. Chlorine, hydrogen, and sodium hydroxide, no waste. It uses less electricity than the other two, so why would you want to use the other two? I don't know. So it's cheaper, and the products that it produces is very, very pure. And we really are considering the purity of the sodium hydroxide. The more pure that product is, the more economically viable is the word I'm looking for. It becomes, because if your product is impure, if we're producing sodium hydroxide that's not very pure, then we have to then pay for the cost of another system to make it pure. That's just stupid. However, we are producing chlorine gas. we are producing hydrogen gas, and we are producing sodium hydroxide, which is an extremely dangerous base. So there are definite dangers in producing these three products. We need to be very careful, and this would go for all three of our cells. How do we store them? And we need to be careful how we use them, okay? And that sort of thing. What I think, I don't actually want to start the diaphragm cell just yet.
Must we take a short break before that?
I think let's take a break, and
Okay,
then we'll hop onto the diaphragm
Okay, awesome.
in the
We're
next
cool with that. I know we
section.
love ad breaks, so we're cool with that. We'll take a very quick ad break. So when we come back, your focus is needed because there is going to be much more for your brains to handle. See you right after the break. Welcome back, Mindsetters. As you know, this is grade 12 physical science, and we are doing the Chloralkali Industry. We are loving the questions. As I always tell you, questions show us that you are not only aware and alive and with us, that you are actually on the right track. So that's how we see. And thank you for the questions because they are very important. And remember that if you don't ask a question, someone else will ask it and then you'll need it. So make sure that you ask the question so that the next person who has the question has the question. Do you understand me? Does that make sense, Tracy?
I think it makes sense. I think I know what you're trying to say.
Okay. Well, if you don't know what I'm
Pretty
trying to say, then Tracy will say it for you.
Okay, on that note, I think what she's trying to say, someone's always going to ask the question you need answered.
Yes.
Just ask it for someone else.
There you go.
Pretty much. And like you said, there's no such thing as a stupid question.
Yes.
Before I actually start this, you did have a question
Yes.
which I just want to quickly address
Yes,
before we
there was
carry
a
on.
question by Lillian. Lillian asks, what is electrolysis?
Okay, Lillian, you're going to have to do a little bit of back work here, okay? You need to go back and look at chemical change. Electrolysis is where we take electrical energy and we convert it into chemical energy, and we use the fact that in electrical circuit we have electrons that move, and those electrons then cause a redox reaction, okay? And we force a redox reaction to happen within, and it's usually an ionic solution. Okay, so you're going to need to go and do some back reading on that, but that's essentially what we're doing. We're taking electrical energy, converting it into chemical energy. Okay? Hoping that plugs that one a little bit. All right, now, you guys have been sending great questions about the environment and human impact and stuff, but we're not going to answer those right now because we need to look at the other two cells first, because we need to look at it in context. Now, the second cell is the diaphragm cell. And if some of you are now looking at this diagram, you're going, well, you know what, Tracy, that looks almost the same as the last one you had. It is very, very, very similar, except for some really important differences, which we're going to go through. First thing you need to recognize is, like the last one, we put in a saturated solution of sodium chloride, okay? So we have our anode and we have our cathode. That saturated solution produces sodium and chlorine ions. What you need to note here, though, is the liquid level on the anode is higher than the liquid level on the cathode. That is very, very, very deliberate. It is there to prevent ions from traveling in two directions. This is the diaphragm cell's one of its disadvantages, okay? Then we have, and just like in the last one, the chlorine ions get attracted to the anode, the actual anode. They form chlorine gas, and chlorine gas comes out the top. So we have Cl minus becoming, not 2Cl, I'm lying, 2Cl minus becoming chlorine gas plus 2 electrons. That hasn't changed. Over here, and this is what we need to talk about. This is our diaphragm. Hate this word. It's one of those words I can never spell properly.
That's okay.
It's horrible because the R's silent. Okay, so we have our diaphragm. The diaphragm is made out of asbestos. Now, grade 11s, in a school lab, for example, it is illegal for me to have asbestos. Why? It is extremely toxic. Took a long time for people to realize it. When you inhale asbestos, it's like a fine dust. It gives you what is known as a disease which is known as asbestosis. It's almost like tuberculosis, okay? It leaves asbestos in your lungs, and you just cough and cough and cough and cough, and it will kill you. It is horrible. So, biggest problem here, this asbestos ends up in the environment. Okay, it eventually breaks down. The diaphragm has to be replaced. Okay, that is a real problem for us. Asbestos is extremely toxic. First big problem with this cell. Then, just like with our other one, we have hydrogen gas that comes out the top. Okay, because we have our sodium ions that move across. We have water. Okay, but there's a problem here. This is not like our membrane cell, where the membrane only allowed the positive ion to move through. Some chlorine ions move through the diaphragm as well, which means we have sodium plus ions moving through, and we have Cl minus ions moving through. The water is being reduced, forming OH minus, okay, just like with our last one. So we still have H2O plus our 2 electrons, and they become H2 gas plus 2OH, which means the sodium plus ions react with the NaOH. We're going to form, which comes out here, sodium hydroxide, but because the Cl minus ions have also migrated, we also get sodium chloride. So, this is not as pure. Big problem. This solution that we now take out has to now be purified. Costs more money. Means more electricity, more energy resources need to be used. Problem, okay? Can you already start to see, if I asked you to compare membrane to diaphragm, there's already some things that you can look at, okay? The diaphragm, environmentally, not a good idea because we're using asbestos. It uses far more electricity than our membrane cell does, and the sodium hydroxide formed is far less pure. The less pure our product, the worse it becomes for us because the more money we have to spend on getting it pure, okay? So we've got all these extra things that happen, but what I do need you to see here is the basic chemistry is the same. So when we look at the overall reaction, okay, we had the chlorine, let's just do it again, just so you can see I'm not lying to you, plus the 2 electrons, and we had the hydrogen, well, the water, okay, and they then give us the electrons disappear, so we have 2 Cl minus plus H2O gives me Cl2 plus H2 plus 2O minus. Guys, I need you to see that the basic chemistry is the same. Biggest problem, the asbestos, very, very dangerous, and extra energy is needed to make the NaOH pure. Good reason to swap to the membrane cell. Why would industries decide not to swap? Because of the cost involved in changing their factories, okay? It sounds quite simple, and I know if you looked at the schematic and put these together, because these really are just schematics, they're very basic drawings, and you put these next, the membrane and the diaphragm cell next to each other in a schematic sort of point of view, they look very similar. But remember, we have simplified this. We have made this in the simplest possible version for you. So be careful in going, well, then they must have changed. Of course they must. But what is any industry motivated by? Money. Okay, so for some industries, they just might not have the financial ability to convert to a membrane cell. Though, if they're in Europe, they have to. They don't actually have a choice anymore because they will get heavily, heavily fined. So pretty much they need to do that. Then, our last cell is the mercury cell. This is the oldest out of the cells, which is why it's there. And the mercury cell actually has two components. The first part, which is here, this is the actual cell part, and then this part, which is called an amalgam. Now we're going to get to some really interesting words, which we all know I'm not so good at pronouncing. It's an amalgam decomposer. Okay, amalgam. Hopefully none of you have had to experience this. When you go to the dentist and he has to give you a filling, it's known as an amalgam. It's never fun. Moving on. So, basically what happens is, and we're going to talk about this top, this is the cell part. This is where we get our reaction, but we get an amalgam. We don't produce pure sodium hydroxide, which then has to be processed. Okay, so what actually happens here? Your anode is here. These little gray things that are at the top, those are my anode, okay? The anode, what we put in, wow. Okay, so now that there we go. Okay.
Is everything okay there?
No, my board's busy fighting with me and showing me all sorts of weird and wonderful things that it doesn't want me to do. Alrighty, well, the board has now gone on strike.
Can you not write with it?
No. The board's gone on strike, so
No, we're
good.
There
we're
you
good.
go. Is it fine now?
Yeah, the board's actually gone on strike. But listen, we can carry on for a little bit and then we'll
cool.
sort it out just now.
Okay.
But during the ad break, we're going to have to
do something. Throw it away.
Yeah, pretty much the board. But I can still write for a while. So hopefully I don't make any mistakes because then
cool.
we have a problem. Anyway, so what I was trying to tell you before the board decided it's home time is we put in sodium chloride just like we do before. Okay, the sodium chloride breaks up. We get the Cr minus ions, which are attracted to the anode. Same thing happens, gets oxidized, and chlorine gas comes out my two parts at the top. Now, the cathode part is this here, and it's made out of mercury. Okay? So the bottom part, very similar to if you've done your electrolysis and you've done the electrolytic cells, very similar to what happens when we do the extraction of aluminium, where the bottom part of the cell is actually your cathode. Bottom part of the cell is a mercury cathode, okay? Now, what happens, and this is important, so let's just write this in here. First of all, my anode, gives me this reaction. Have we decided to? No, it's still on strike, just so you know. Okay. Wow, the board does not like me tonight.
Must we just take a break just so we can sort those gremlins out?
Yeah, and I think we're going to need to. Sorry, guys, I don't know what's going on.
That's okay, Tracy. So as you guys know, the gremlins have gotten a hold of our board, and therefore we need to sort that out. See you right now, just shortly after the break. Welcome back, Mindsetters. We managed to get a hold of the gremlins in the board, so we are back. Tracy almost killed the board, but we managed to stop her. She almost brought out her machine guns and everything, so we managed to stop her and get the board right, because you know how she gets when this board doesn't obey her. I mean, I'm sure her students are also like, yeah, she gets like that with us too, but she doesn't. She's very awesome, and she is ready for you guys. Over to you, Tracy.
Okay, now that my producers decided, he's talking to me now. Anyway, I'm so sorry about that. This board really doesn't like me. I'm sorry. Anyway, moving on. We were busy discussing. We'll go back to being normal. We were discussing the mercury cell. So, besides all the other things, so we said we have NaCl, which goes in. What I was trying to tell you before the board actually had its whole moment was the mercury, okay, is your cathode. So this isn't quite the same reaction as we saw before, because instead of the water reacting with the cathode, we actually have the sodium, which now gains its electron at that cathode and becomes sodium metal. But it forms, remember this is done at very, very high temperatures, it forms what we call an amalgam. So right over here we have a sodium mercury amalgam. And essentially, that is just a very fancy word for a metal mixture. Okay? What happens when you go to the dentist and you need a filling, they put an amalgam in your mouth? It is just a fancy word for a mixture. Okay, but having a sodium mercury mixture really is quite useless for us in the long run. We don't want it. Plus, we all know mercury is a very dangerous metal. It is a heavy metal. We'll talk about why it's so dangerous in a second. It's actually one of my favorite stories. And what happens, it now goes into the amalgam decomposer. At this point, and this is really done through heat, we have H2 gas, which comes off the top. So once again, we still have hydrogen gas coming off. This cell, because it was one of our original cells, is the reason why we say that hydrogen is a byproduct. We put water into the decomposer. We heat it up. It almost looks like a furnace. Hydrogen comes out the top, and sodium hydroxide comes out the bottom. And, let's go back to a pen. And mercury comes out the very, very bottom, which is then put back into the system. So this part over here, you can't really see it. It's a bit hard to see. We have water over here. We have sodium. This is sort of like our mixture here. And we get sodium hydroxide, and then mercury comes out the bottom. So we can actually take all three out. It's slightly different. At this point over here, we have sodium reacting with water, which then gives us sodium hydroxide and hydrogen. Okay? Now, that's a reaction you've most definitely seen before. You had to do that in grade 10 when you looked at the reactivity series. Okay? Now, why would we want to use a mercury cell? We're using mercury, for heaven's sake. Number one, the products are extremely pure. Very, very pure. I know you're sort of going, but hang on, wait, we had an amalgam. We did have an amalgam, but we weren't finished. We're not talking about this product, the amalgam product. We're talking, when I say that the products that come out are very pure, we're talking about those products. Okay, the hydrogen and the sodium hydroxide and the chlorine that comes out the top. Very, very pure. The chlorine doesn't need to be purified against. It's the only thing that comes out the top. It's great. But, and this is a huge but, number one, the mercury is a problem. Mercury can leak out, okay, goes into the environment. Mercury is a heavy metal, okay, and sometimes mercury is also then present in the products, and we're talking particularly in the hydrogen and sodium hydroxide. That is a huge problem for us, okay? Because now you're going to go, well, why is that a problem? This is one of my favorite stories. I tell my kids this all the time, and maybe Kaklecho would know. You've heard the expression mad as a hatter, right?
Yes.
They're not really referring to me, by the way. And most people think, which story do you think it comes from? Where do we have a Mad Hatter?
Alice in Wonderland?
Alice in Wonderland. So most people go, oh, you was mad as a hatter because we're referring to Alice in Wonderland. Well, actually, we're not.
Really?
Nope, not at all.
So Alice in Wonderland got it from where?
Ah, see, that's what I'm going to tell you. You see, you
know,
can come
I'm
back.
so
You just respond so
smart.
well to it, I know. Anyway, what actually used to happen is hatters was a profession. So you're looking at people who used to make hats and leather goods and that sort of thing. And one of the ways of curing leather is to use mercury on it. We don't do that anymore for obvious reasons. But hatters worked with mercury all the time. Now, mercury isn't one of those toxic metals where you get a little bit in and you automatically, you can notice. It's not. It's what we call accumulative. So mercury seeps in through the skin. So it's not like they breathed it in or drank it or anything like that. It's literally just seeped in through the skin. It's also why, please, grade 12s, I know when a mercury thermometer breaks, the first thing you want to do is play with the mercury because it's fun. Don't. Okay? Bad for you. Anyway, moving on. That's my little hint for the day. So, because they were always working with it and it would seep through their hands and they would make hats and shoes and all that sort of thing, but it's accumulative. So over their lifetimes, it would keep seeping through their hands, through their skin. And it affects the brain and literally makes you go mad. So hatters
were mad after some time.
Pretty much. They were insane. They were all just a little wonky, which is why we got the expression, you're as mad as a hatter, because hatters were
mad.
Yeah,
but Miguel actually has a question on that.
Yes.
She asks, since Mercury is the oldest and out of phase, why is it that we bother learning about it or writing about it?
Oh, I just love those questions because it's important that you know why we don't use it anymore. There are still places that use the Mercury cell, okay? And the whole concept of the amalgam is really important here because that amalgam is your sodium-mercury mixture, okay? And yes, we might not use it anymore, and it has to have been phased out, but that's a recent thing. The chemistry here is really important, and also we're trying to put your science in context. If we only showed you the things we use now, you never learn that science is actually about trial and error, and sometimes what we think works today, a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, we're now going to be going, well, actually, not a good idea. And remember, when we started looking at the mercury cells and when people started using them, we didn't really understand how dangerous things like mercury was. So we are now wiser, hopefully. Maybe we're more environmentally aware, though not always. And we're more conscious of the decisions we're making. So we're trying to put your science into a complete context. I know it feels like a waste, but it's actually a very, very important process. Okay. Hope that helps.
Yes, it does.
Because I know I've got a lot of kids who go, I don't want to know. I know. But
well, they just think if it causes so much damage and it's just so bad for us, then why don't we just chuck it away and not learn about it and leave it?
Money, money, money.
There you go.
That's exactly what it comes down. There are still places in Europe, hopefully not anymore, they're about to get fined really badly, that we're still using the mercury cell. Money, tradition. You know, family business or business that gets passed down, and that's what you use. And sometimes, you know, you just don't know any better. So, yeah.
True. So we need to know.
I do have a question prepared, but I think there was some coming through. Let's see if we can get through some of those first, and then we'll go on to the question I had.
Okay, so there were many questions about how it affects, or the chloralkali industry, how it affects humans and human life. Can you go through that?
Yeah. Guys, that's actually quite important because what I suggest you do is, I've gone through it really, really quickly, is make a table for yourself. So if we go down here, is set up a table and do a couple of things. So you're going to have your membrane cell. Okay, membrane. I've lost the ability to spell. So we have our membrane cell. We have the diaphragm, and then we have the mercury. Okay, and this is where you need to look at similarities and differences between them. So we can make this say advantages and disadvantages. Oh, once again, I've lost this board. Advantages. Disadvantages. There we go. And now, because I can do this fairly easily, most of them have the same advantages. They produce chlorine, hydrogen, and sodium hydroxide. All three of which is what I ran through really, really quickly right at the beginning, have lots of uses for us. So in terms of how it affects humans, chlorine's used for PVC, disinfectants, purifying water, pool acid, all of that sort of thing. Hydrogen gas, used for the rocket fuel, that sort of thing. Sodium hydroxide used in manufacture of paper, textiles. It's a very, very important industrial base. Those are all the advantages, okay? In terms of human advantages, how does it affect us? Well, a lot of what we use around us is dependent on these things. Remember, chlorine is how we can then be used to make hydrochloric acid. Hydrogen is used to make ammonia, which is then used to make nitric acid, which is then eventually made to use ammonium nitrate, which is then used as a fertilizer. So essentially, hydrogen, this is one of the first stages in making fertilizers. Fertilizers, why fertilizer is important? Because we put them on crops. Those crops grow, they make food, we eat the food, we're happy. Okay? Basic to put it. But we then need to look at, and most of you I think are starting to get there, the environmental impacts. And this is, I'm not going to write it down, but for example, the biggest disadvantage with the Mercury cell is the environmental impact, and it uses a lot of energy. Okay, simply, and there you're going back to the production of the electricity, because in the Mercury cell, you've got the electricity you need in the actual first part of the cell, then you've got the electricity you need in the decomposer for separating the sodium and the mercury. So not only are you using mercury, which is a very toxic heavy metal, but you're using a lot of electricity, which means if you backtrack it to the production of that electricity, which if we taken it in our context means probably a good chance it's made from coal, extra environmental issues. Be careful here, grade 12s, because what I see is you go, uses lots of electricity, bad for the environment. No, electricity is not bad for the environment. How we produced the electricity is bad. You've got to backtrack it. Be very, very careful. If I got that in a test or an exam, I would not mark that right, because yes, it uses lots of electricity. You can't tell me it uses lots of electricity, bad for the environment. No, it's not. The production of the electricity it uses can be bad for the environment if it's from a coal-fired power station. Be very careful. If it's from a hydroelectric power station, maybe not so much. If it's from a nuclear power station, maybe not so much. Depends on where the electricity comes from. Be very, very careful. Your diaphragm cell also uses quite a bit of electricity, but it's the asbestos. That's bad for the impact when you're talking about impact on humans. Okay? Membrane cell is the best. The membrane is actually an organic polymer. It's very guarded. It's a close guarded secret. Do not ask me what it is, because I don't know. Okay, no one except the person who produced it and the industry knows what it is. You cannot Google it. You will not find it. Please don't ask, because I don't know. Just going to put it out there, because the answer to that question is, I don't know.
Don't know.
Okay. But it's an organic polymer. That much we do know, which means it's actually not so bad for the environment. Doesn't use as much electricity, which means when we backtrack, it's not so bad. Okay, I'm hoping that helps.
That does. Thank you. And Svesa asked this question earlier. Now Kashifa is also asking it. How do we go about assigning oxidation numbers?
Wow, that's not really part of what we're...
Is it not part of it?
Doing.
Okay.
Sweetie, that's part of redox. And you don't really need to know about the oxidation numbers. And in this section, if you're struggling with that, learn those 3 equations. Okay, it's the only 3 you're going to have to learn them. Okay, the assigning of oxidation numbers is redox. It's not actually part of what we're doing now.
And then there's one here. Let me just... Okay, from the diaphragm cell, is the NaCl from the anode pure?
Anode.
Is it pure?
The NaCl that comes from your diaphragm cell.
From anode is pure.
The anode. That comes out from your cathode, actually. It doesn't come from your anode. You get... From here, remember, with the diaphragm cell, that's absolutely disgusting handwriting. It does look different when all my handwriting's gone because of my little moment. Okay, remember here we get sodium hydroxide and we get NaCl, which is actually a combination. It's pure once it's refined again. Biggest problem with the diaphragm cells that we have to this product has to go through another process where we get the NaCl out and we get the NaOH. Big problem here, the NaOH isn't a great pure, it's not very concentrated. The NaCl that we do get out then gets saturated again and put into the cell, and we repeat the process, but it's pure once it's been refined, but it's not pure when it comes out to the NaOH.
Okay.
Yeah.
And next, okay, so Bridget asked, What source of energy makes the chloralkali process practical on a larger scale?
It's it's an electrical source. It depends on where it's built and what the supply is. It's always practical. Okay, it's a very practical process. It's an easy process, but it's electrical energy that is being transferred into chemical energy. Okay, it is practical. Some of these processes are what we call a batch process. The membrane cell and the diaphragm cell work in what we call batch processes, which means we put in a whole bunch of sodium chloride, let it react, take out the products, and do it again. It's very good for quality control. The diaphragm cell is a continuous process, which means they're just continuously pumping in the Na cell. It's also what uses up so much electricity. But it is practical. It's the energy source is electricity, and that depends on where it's located, who the energy supply is, which country it's in, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And then Miguel asks, Miguel is a he. I said she earlier.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Miguel. But he asks, is the function of the membrane to move only positive ions to the cathode?
Yes, it is. That's what makes the membrane so important, is if we go back, which will have nothing on it, remember we put in the sodium chloride, and I don't think you can actually see the blue, so let's do green. I like the green. And that splits up. And what we want is we want the chlorine ions to be attracted to the anode so they can lose their electrons and form chlorine gas. And we want only the Na plus ions to move across because they are actually attracted to the cathode, which is our negative electrode. And not only is the water, which is then, remember, reduced, which then produces the OH minus ions and the H2 gas, but that means the OH minus and the Na plus can react together. We want that. Remember, with the diaphragm cell, we can have both the positive and negatives traveling, which is why with the diaphragm cell we don't get a pure product, because the Cl minus ions are still attracted to the Na plus ions. They try the difference in the liquid levels is an attempt to stop the Cl minus ions from migrating, and not as many do, but they still migrate because remember, the Na plus ions are attracted to the cathode very, very strongly, but the Cl minus ions are also attracted to the Na plus ions, and they really want to be with them. They like the Na plus ions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's another one.
Yeah.
Ashworth asks, does the membrane cell have similar characteristics with an electrolytic cell?
No. Ashworth, this is an electrode. This is a... Yes, sorry, I'm lying to you. It's electrolysis. It is an electrolytic cell. Electrolysis, electrolytic, same thing. Electrolytic cell, electrical energy to chemical energy. We are just looking at a very specific electrolytic cell, which is what happens when I'm using sodium chloride. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So let's try find another one for you, since we are on the ball.
They're doing well tonight,
yes,
grade 12.
they really are. Some of these questions you have already clarified, and they now know the answer. But there was one here that
Just trying to find it. There's so many.
There
Yes.
are. Isn't the H2O supposed to have a coefficient of 2?
Okay. When I do the equations. Okay. So it's very possible. Let's have a look, because I know you want it, and the answer there is actually no. No, the answer there is 2. You are correct. I apologize. It is actually supposed to be 2. Whoever said that, well done.
Ndamelo.
We have our moments. Sorry, you are correct. If we're writing it as a truly balanced equation, which I wasn't, so yes. Unless, should there be 2 OH? Just trying to check, because we've got 2. Yes. It has the coefficient of 2 because we also want 2 electrons. So yes, you are correct.
Okay.
Well done, sweetie.
And then going back to the beginning,
Yes.
someone had asked, what are spectator ions?
Okay, spectator ions are, when you go and let's use the Olympics because it's just finished. We were spectators to the Olympics, okay? I not a chance I was ever going to take part. But if you consider all the people who went to sit in the stadiums, they were spectators. They are there because they make the event more enjoyable. They weren't necessary. We didn't need the spectators as per se, but they're nice to have around. when we look at this reaction, the spectator is sodium, okay? And we need the sodium because Cl minus doesn't exist on its own, and OH minus cannot exist on its own, okay? Those are they're negative ions. We cannot find them as just existing on their own. We just happen to be using sodium because we're using sodium chloride, which is brine water. Sodium becomes our spectator. It's not changing phase. It's not changing oxidation number, as one of the girls asked. It's still +1, okay? It's still lost its one little electron. Shame the poor thing. But it needs a friend. The negative ions need positive friends. Those are the spectators. So that's why they're there. They don't take part, but they allow the reaction to happen because the negative, or sometimes the spectator is negative, but in this case, a positive spectator allows the negative ions to take part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want one more?
One more, let's go.
Okay, let's go for one more by Dino.
Yes.
Dino asks, so does chlorine gas contribute to air pollution?
If it escapes, absolutely, and it's very dangerous if it does. Chlorine gas, if it escapes from this, is very, very dangerous. In all of these, we've obviously simplified it, and we've shown the gases coming out the top of the cells. They are collected into containers, okay? So they go into storage containers straight away. They don't just allow, they're not allowed to roam free. Chlorine gas is extremely toxic. I spoke about earlier that chlorine gas is the basis of mustard gas. Okay, it is a horrible, horrible, horrible death, okay? It burns, and this is going to be quite disgusting, I'm sorry for our sensitive viewers, it burns your mucous membranes, which is like what the membranes inside your nose and your eyes and your ears. And I actually have an eye infection right now. My eyes are really sore, and it's even worse than that. It's just like when your eyes get all dry and it makes them bleed, and it's it is disgusting. Chlorine gas. Trust me, you'll know when you've smelt chlorine. I'm sure some of you have smelt hydrochloric acid, or when you put pool acid. Too much pool acid in a pool. There's that horrible, and it's pungent.
Yeah.
So they know.
And your eyes sting and
they burn
red.
and you want to cough, and it's just, it is horrible. So they store it. It's very, very dangerous for the environment.
Okay.
Yeah, very dangerous.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions we have. I think we got through many questions today.
Oh, guys, you did great today. These are very, very good questions. Now, just to quickly wrap up, guys, what you need to do with this is such an important section. I can talk to you about this as much as I like. Make a summary. Make a way of comparing all three. Make sure you know the reactions. Okay, make summaries and comparisons. And I'm actually going to have to say good night.
I think we must.
Thanks, guys. We're going to turn to you to say goodbye.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay. Thank you for an awesome show. Thank you, Mindsetters. You guys were also absolutely amazing today. And thank you to Liberty. We will see you next week for another physical science show. Remember to learn more and learn extra. Good night.